his visions for advancing climate and transportation solutions in South County. And we have 3 distinguished speakers joining us this evening as well to look at different angles on this very important topic. We are honored to be joined by Councilmember Delinda Fischer, Petaluma Climate Commissioner Kailea Frederick, and Teri Shore, environmentalist. We will have time to hear from all of them, as well as yourselves. So again, please put questions in the chat throughout the evening. With that, we will begin with our first speaker, Councilmember Fischer, as we dive into the topic of climate and transportation. And we have a couple questions we'd love to hear from you. The first one is, what is Cool Cities and what is needed to help grow its impact? And the second is, what transit challenges do we face in South County in relation to addressing climate change?
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you for inviting me tonight. So the Cool City Challenge was a grant opportunity that we became aware of last year that was offered by the Empowerment Institute. It's $1 million grant. And so we got a group together here locally and created a steering committee. And I see Raja is in the audience. He was on that group. And what we did was we found 24 community partners, both in the public and the private and the civic sectors. And they in turn helped us get 200 cool block leaders. And so that was part of the requirements for the application. The other piece of it was doing a piece on technology, policy, finance, and community engagement to actually let the Empowerment Institute know how we were going to meet our climate neutrality goals by 2030. So it really was a process by showing that we had the community support, showing that we had the political will, and showing that we really had an idea of how we're going to get to carbon neutrality by 2030. Do we really know all that? I'm not sure, but anyway, so that was the application process. We were chosen, so the community of Petaluma, along with the city of Los Angeles and the city of Irvine. And so we're working collaboratively with those 2 cities because, you know, the knowledge that the 3 of us have, even though they're larger cities, it's amazing the collaboration that we can do, more information that we have. And so we kicked off the Cool Block program in January of this year. And what the Cool Block program is those Cool Block leaders that have committed to doing that work, they go and knock on the doors of everybody on their block and invite them to a meeting to let them know about the challenge and about the program and what it is. And then they hold a series of, the group, once they come together, hold a series of meetings over 5 months. And they discuss 8 different topic areas. And that has to do with water stewardship and energy use and disaster preparedness. And they collectively, as households, they all decide to take actions. And those actions are actually recorded. And I have some statistics about where we are now, just in April. So we have already trained 100 Cool Block leaders. And they, sorry, I have to get to my notes on that. And they have now 124 households currently reporting. They've taken 1,176 actions to date, and this has only been going on since January, with an estimated savings of 377,538 pounds of carbon saved. And again, this is going to go on for the next 3 years. While we had over 200 Cool Block leaders for the application submittal last fall, we have now, we keep doing information sessions, and we now have over 300 Cool Block leaders ready to go. I don't know that we'll get 200 going this year. It's proving to be a challenge. Part of the grant initially was to hire staff. So we have 2 part-time program managers and a part-time campaign manager who are actually leading this effort. So there's lots of support for our community leaders. So the goal is to get 400 cool blocks. So those cool blocks become cool neighborhoods. And those cool neighborhoods then lead us to become a cool city. And once we get 400 cool blocks, we will become a cool city. And I'm losing my voice. So that's a little bit about the Cool City Challenge. The application process will be open to other cities in California and nationwide this year, probably in the fall. So if you know any other cities that are interested in this sort of work, it's really about this sort of bottom-up empowering the community to take action. But of course, we also need that sort of top-down, that policy piece. So you asked me about transportation, and what I see as the challenges in our county is that we basically built out our cities as suburban, car-oriented neighborhoods. And we also have a freeway that we continue to widen that actually bisects many of our communities. So I see those as the two big challenges. But I also see a great deal of opportunity because back to some other statistics. While you said that on-road transportation, in Petaluma, it's actually 57% of our emissions from 2018 data. But the opportunity here is that 37% of the trips that originate in Petaluma are less than 2 miles in length, and 68% are under 5 miles. And as you know, we have, a fairly flat city. We have great weather. And so I see what we really need to do are sort of 3 things. And you didn't ask me for the solutions, but I'm going to tee those up for Blake. So one is create 15-minute cities. And we're doing this through another grant that we received from the American Institute of Architects. They're going to do a model for us. And that is so redesigning our neighborhoods so that you can have the services and the things that you need within a 15-minute walk. So that's the first thing. The second is to redesign our roadways to prioritize active transportation and safety, and develop a transit system that replaces the convenience of the car. And that's going to create that's going to require a real mind shift in terms of how we plan our cities and how we move forward. But I think that that's exactly what we needed, and that's our future.
Thank you so much, Delinda, for that, encompassing so many huge projects and issues in a short amount of time. But that was a really great overview. And we'd love to hand it over to candidate Hooper to reflect on a little bit of these challenges and opportunities and what you could do if elected.
Well, I also want to thank Councilmember Fischer for really laying out both what Cool Cities is doing, but also the challenge that our cities and our county faces when we're trying to move away from being a car-centric community. And I also very much appreciate teeing up those solutions, because a big part of how we're going to pivot away from being a car-centric community as a county is by kind of looking at how we remove cars from the road on every level. And so it's, how are you removing those 15-minute trips? How are you removing those journeys that could have been taken by bus? How are you getting bikes on the road for one portion of the population, electric bikes for another? How are we getting people to take the train instead of commuting by way of car all the way from one end of the county to the next? These are ways for us to slowly pivot away. And just reflecting quickly on Cool Cities, it is wonderful to see the city of Petaluma, and Councilmember Fischer, I know you did a lion's share of the work of getting Cool Cities to happen in Petaluma, making sure that Petaluma could be selected as one of the first while going through a process that was still being worked out. That's huge. I want to make sure that at a county level, we are not reliant on one city taking us this far. I'm glad Petaluma did it, because now we have a model. Now we have a place to look. But I want to see us looking at doing this countywide in every city, and not just as a Cool City project, but that idea of how we get down to a neighborhood by neighborhood level, how we start looking at reclamation in a practical level. Because I know there's a sentiment that's become really popular for folks who don't want to think about climate change, which is, well, without national policy, without pivoting to, force large corporations to deal with what they've caused, we're never going to be able to do anything about it. It shouldn't be pushed on the individual. Well, I personally would love to see the policy that tackles that. But since we don't have that yet, it is up to us. It is up to us at a local level. It's up to us at a city level. It's up to us at a county level. And one of the things that, just reflecting on what has been presented, one of the things that we've missed at the county level is that kind of coordinated leadership. One thing that wasn't brought up is the Regional Climate Protection Authority, or RCPA. Some folks watching might know of it, many probably don't. It is a body that is theoretically supposed to coordinate climate protection policy between cities and the county, and it on a rough level. What it actually does, well, there are lovely plans and there's lovely comment about the plans, but very little in terms of leadership from that organization to make sure that we start to see these things implemented. That's why I'm so excited about Cool Cities, because now we're seeing something that could be implemented and seeing something that's tangible and practical that we can start to look at with our CPA. As a supervisor, I would want to be working to not see the county replace our CPA, because I know there's a lot of, well, frankly, there's a lot of goodwill that's going to have to be built between the cities and the county when it comes to coordination. It's got to be partnerships and it has to be on equal footing. So what I want to see as supervisors do the work to help give our CPA the resources and the authority it needs to really be that coordinating entity for us, and to really have like tangible teeth to it, so that we can start to see these resources deployed throughout the county. And just on the transit note, right now we have city transit, county transit, and regional transit through Golden Gate actually starting to talk. But even though they're starting to communicate and starting to work to have, shared fares, a shared system, make it feel like you get on one bus here and you're on the same system in Santa Rosa, all that is great. The problem is the train gets left out of it altogether. If we are going to have regional transit in Sonoma County, we are going to have get to a point where the smart train can be a spine for major trips, where our bus network can really focus on making sure we're getting people to major traffic hubs, and where we also have shuttles alongside electric bikes, alongside expanded pedestrian bicycle pathways. We have to start thinking of it as one system and towards a goal, because right now, through the regional coordination we have now, it's mostly responding to city projects. It's not looking at what we could be doing countywide or where we want to be in 20, 30 years. And that's where we're going to have to go, because we have just finished expanding Highway 101. We got a third lane. Congratulations to us. We had to tax ourselves twice to do it. It took over 20 years. I think 3 different supervisors had their hands on it at one point. If that is your end all be all, great. We're never getting a 4th lane. And every traffic engineer will tell you that the minute you add a lane, kind of like a goldfish in a fish tank, mind you, I've never actually seen that happen with a goldfish, but it's what we reference, so we'll go with it. Traffic will start to fill. So we are going to have about a year of good traffic, and then it will go away. And now that we've had so many people move here as a result of the pandemic, thinking they were going to work from home forever, only to find out they're not. That's even more traffic on the road and a whole lot of people who thought they had a BART station. So if we are going to actually see meaningful change on our transit, we will actually need a regional approach to how we're thinking about it. And that's why I'm grateful for the solutions that Councilmember Fischer brought forward, because we are going to need to take those 15-minute trips away. We are going to have to take those crosstown trips away by car. We are going to have to really make it so that if you are taking a car, it's because you really want to, and it's for a specific reason, not because you just gotta get to work. So that's all I'll say for now, as I'm probably going a little too long.
Well, I really appreciate the depth of response, and Councilmember Fischer for teeing up a really important conversation on the intersection of climate, individual agency, and transportation. So we're going to dive into solutions a little bit more with our next amazing speaker, Climate Commissioner Frederick. We've got a couple questions we'd love to hear from you. What are some sustainable climate solutions we can adopt on an institutional level, and what partnership possibilities exist to implement these solutions?
Thank you for these questions, and also thank you for the invitation to join you all this evening. It's definitely just an honor, and I'm, per usual, excited to address and talk about some potential solutions that could exist on a wider scale. So, I feel like Councilmember Fischer and, Blake Hooper, I feel the two of you really actually touched on a lot of what it is that I was wanting to get into this evening. So I'm just going to share a little bit of my perspective as a current commissioner. So as was previously shared, Petaluma is via the city, and also Cool Cities Petaluma, we're working towards this really big 2030 goal. And it feels exciting. And also, how is this going to happen is a question I think that we're consistently asking. Do we actually have the infrastructure in place? Not quite. Do we have all of the resources that are needed, even with the $1 million grant? No. And more specifically, like, do we have the actual strategy and coordination that's needed across the region in order for us to really actually live into this goal? Because despite us being a commission that is geared and oriented around a city, we don't view ourselves, in isolation. As the two of you were speaking to, it seems like this funny thing to be like, we're going to do carbon neutral in one city, despite the fact that we live on a living planet, and we're really all interconnected. So a lot of the time, our commission, we find ourselves in this kind of strange place of how far can we go as a city? But also, does it really matter if we're only doing this as a city? And so that was why, I feel excited about this campaign, and why I was excited to be able to just come in and listen and learn alongside all of you this evening. So, our commission is currently in the process right now of starting to create a much more detailed pathway towards carbon neutrality on a city level. So we're looking at a few different avenues for how we're going to do this. And, I think they're the known entities for anyone that is familiar in these spaces, but environmental justice, how is it that we're always applying an equity lens to the work and the solutions, looking at consumption, mitigation, sequestration, and adaptation. But we continue to feel like we were coming up just against the rub of what this tension point of okay, we can push things here on a city, but people come in and out of Petaluma, that live in the other parts of the county, or people live, we're not in this isolated space. So in terms of thinking about some of the partnership possibilities, you were already touching on our CPA, and there's this main question that it sounds like you're really eager and excited to address, but how is it that the RCPA can come up with the policies necessary to start moving us as a county forward, and also have the authority, as you were touching on, to actually get jurisdictions to implement them? Because it feels, as right now, as you're kind of saying, the teeth isn't quite there. And then the other partnership possibility that our commission is really curious about, but feels, it feels they're aware that we want more, and I think we just need more people in conversation. But Sonoma Clean Power, I think there's just this question around how Sonoma Clean Power can be ramping up incentives, and really aligning them with the phase out dates and specific phase out dates, and then really specifically creating deep incentives for some type of comprehensive program to retrofit all low income households in the county. And that's something that, we have a few different people on our commission who have been spending so far the entirety of our commission's lifespan, so 2.5 years, on trying to figure out. And I think it's just, we're hitting a point where we could use some additional support to try to understand, how do we crack this code so that it's not only people of a certain, class or wealth status that are able to do these retrofits? How is it that renters can do them as well? And how can we also support homeowners that are not necessarily wealthy, in taking this next step? And then in terms of some of the sustainable solutions that, our commission sees that we should be adopting on a county level, I'll just say that personally, I'm going to just say, in my own personal life right now, I'm really leaning into decarbonization for a lot of reasons that are quite obvious. And, we got to hear a little bit about transit, but I just wanted to frame that because the 4 that I have here are really based on decarbonization very specifically. So we need a detailed implementation plan for transportation, buildings, and waste sectors on a county level, so that it's not just like our city, like this is what we're doing, but again, like that broad umbrella. We immediately need to stop all expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure in the county. So, you know, no more gas as well in new buildings, and also no more gas stations, which is something that Petaluma has led on. And we know that there's been a ripple, but we would like it if it was like a very clear, like as a county, we're just not doing this anymore. Like, why are we continuing to feed the fossil fuel industry? And then lastly, we need to set a really clear phase out date for when gas appliances will no longer be allowed to be sold. So we actually need to come up with that. You know, I think there's this like, we're in this interesting like tension middle moment of like waiting for some people's appliances to be done. And then when they're done, you can, you know, transition them over. But we also don't have a lot of time to wait. So I think we're looking for just that next step of a very clear date, you know, and I'm just going to put it out there. A year and a half to 2 years, we're done with this and we're moving on. So yeah, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear some of your thoughts on some of what I'm bringing up.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Frederick. And yeah, would love to hear you respond. Blake.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was very excited to respond because I'm glad you touched on everything that you did. Because you hit it at an institutional level, but also on specific solutions that we can really start hitting the ground running on. And I'm going to start with electrification, since that's kind of where the discussion ended at that point. I want to see this county help ensure that we are doing what we need to move towards total electrification. What I want to see happen, though, because this is what I'm worried about. I don't want to see us move to electrification by way of who can afford it, only for those who are left now paying a higher and higher gas bill, essentially, as they're discovering that it's a smaller community supply that is being charged essentially cost for it. And I know as I say this must sound like, oh no, he wants to back away from it. Quite the opposite. What I want to see the county do is start to look at ways to work either by way of working with cities, but also through Sonoma Clean Power. And I have had some conversations about the Sonoma Clean Power partnership angle of this. Start to look at how we help subsidize and bring down the costs for electrification for our more low-income families. I want to get to that first, and then also add in, I agree with you, we need the phase-out date. I want to hit these two things at the same time so we know that a portion of our communities are taken care of that would be hit by this the hardest. And then everybody else who can actually afford it, knowing, hey, these changes are going to be required. Aside from new building and new construction, it's a retroactive requirement that we're going to start to want to see. As part of that, in terms of further partnerships with regards to like electrification, I've talked with folks at Sonoma Clean Power. They're very excited by the idea of being able to help subsidize and help bring down costs for people to move into solar. And as I'm talking, my phone's ringing, I apologize. To be able to move into solar cheaper, to be able to get into battery storage so that we can create more microgrids, pull people off of PG&E. And one point I'd make about that is that we have a significant inflation issue right now in the state. I mean, it's nationwide, but I was looking at statistics just last week that were talking about how so much of our state's inflation right now is just natural gas costs per household. So our ability to move away from this long-term not only brings down the cost of living for most people, but it's also going to help inoculate us from economic ups and downs as we're dealing with prolonged issues globally. I know Sonoma Clean Power wants to help with this. I know there are grant opportunities to start looking at these incentives. And another component to this is also, they really want to see an expansion of our geothermal supply so that when we do have issues with battery storage, or we do have kind of essentially weathery days where solar is just not as efficient, we have that backup supply. Because I really want to see us start to do the infrastructure on a personal level, but also on a city and county level, so that we're not having to worry about where we're getting our power from. And so that we're also not worried about things like PSPS events or the cost of inflation or the cost of natural gas. So that was one component of it. Going to the rest of what you were talking about, though, I got very excited about electrification, so I do apologize for focusing on that a little too long. You brought up this issue of talking about climate action, trying to do this work, especially the decarbonization work in the city, and then how ridiculous it feels because you've got people moving in and out of Petaluma just to get to where they're going, and we're part of this broader community. That's part of why I want to make sure, and mind you, I do know the county finally, after 10 years of kicking the can down the road, technically started the general plan process this week with a timeline that baffles me. But I want to see the county actually adopt a climate mitigation plan that doesn't move at cross purposes with our cities, but is also partially informed by them and works in parallel with them. This is my way of saying, I don't want you to leave Petaluma and then immediately these good practices stop happening. I think this is a great way where learning from our cities can really help inform our county of what we should be doing and where we can apply these lessons. Now, I know it's a little bit different because we have a lot of rural land. And I know there is some concern about, well, how do you get some of the rural community engaged in this, especially when we talk about things like healthy soils or decarbonization or reclamation, or how we talk about certain farming or dairy practices. I have been canvassing and spending a lot of time in these areas, especially in the last few months. And one thing that has come up over and over again is this sense of they feel like, no, we do want to do some of this, but we are painted in a certain picture. And then when you start to bring it up and you start to talk to folks, it very quickly becomes an issue of there are folks that want to do it because they know it's the right thing to do. And then there are folks that are confused as to why. Part of what I want to do as supervisor is not just see the same fights happen over and over again, but really bring this community in to be able to be part of the solution. I know it'll be difficult. I know there'll be long conversations, but I think it's going to be really critical if we're going to hit our goals, especially by 2030. And then just hitting on an institutional level, because I realize my time is up at this segment very soon. This is also why, if we're going to move forward as a county with our general plan update, if we're going to move forward with the projects we're building, if we're going to move forward with a lot of the development fights that we've been having lately, we have to center climate and decarbonization in every project we take on. It's also why I want to see a difference in how reports are written, a difference in how projects are presented, and I want to see an impact cost added to everything that we do. I know there's a lot more that you brought to the table in this. I also know that I'm going a little long on this segment, but I do just want to say thank you for everything that you brought up, because this is going to be critical, not just seeing that our cities lead, but seeing that the county catches up to match. Because if we don't, we are going to find ourselves in a situation where you have a handful of cities doing all of the work in a county that's just falling farther behind. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Blake, for diving into the decarbonization. And you touched a little bit on development, which is a good transition to our next speaker, Teri Shore, who's a longtime and well-known and beloved environmentalist in Sonoma County. And Teri, we would love to hear from you, moving into the role of green belts, community separators, and our beloved open space, and ensuring that we don't have encroachment into our open space, and what challenges South County has in regards to protected open space and parks.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie, and thanks to my fellow panelists, and thank you to supervisorial candidate Blake Hooper. And I know I'm going to support Blake Hooper for supervisor, and I hope everybody who's here today will be voting for Blake Hooper. So had to get that in. So I am going to answer your questions through a PowerPoint, because I'm just used to using PowerPoints and I get to show you some pretty pictures. And I thought it would just be useful, just when we start this discussion, is to just kind of define what is a green belt, because some of us, maybe everybody on this call, knows what a green belt is, but I've found in my work that a lot of times people say, what is a green belt? And I'm like, you don't know? So, Greenbelt is really a general term that refers to natural, undeveloped, and or agricultural lands that surround urban areas. So they're the ones that you can see out the window. These lands could include open spaces, parks, farms and ranches, wildlands, wetlands, or a combination thereof. And most of these are protected through some sort of designation by cities, counties, special districts, and other jurisdictions through zoning, general plans, ordinances, and in some cases, a permanent protection through purchase or conservation easements. So there isn't one, definition of greenbelt in anywhere really. They're implemented in many different ways. So in Sonoma County, we're very, very fortunate because dating back to the 80s and the 90s, when we first put together our general plans, the county has been committed to protecting farmland and open space. And we put this into longstanding policies that are backed by the voters of our county. And the three key ones are our community separators, which I'm going to show you in a minute, which are county lands in between the cities that have been designated through the general plan and through a zoning overlay that basically says that these lands will not be, the development will not be intensified, malls or anything along those lines, but it would allow wineries and agriculture and low density, like 1 unit per 10 acres or more in the unincorporated communities. And it was put on the ballot for the first time in the 90s and then renewed in 2016. So not only is it a policy in the general plan, if the supervisors or anyone wants to change it, it doesn't mean it can't be changed. It just means you have to go to the people and say, do we want to change? And the partners to our Greenbelt in the form of community separators are our urban growth boundaries. So the urban growth boundary are lines around every one of our cities in Sonoma County. Everybody has one, including Petaluma, Runner Park, I think, is in District 2. Every city has them, and they have been renewed, and they are also backed by a vote of the people. So if there is an intention to expand the urban growth boundary, which is essentially the city limits, sometimes there's a little variation, it needs to go to a vote of the people. So it's not just a 3-2 vote of the supervisor. So these are very strong policies. And then on top of all that, Sonoma County has voted in a tax measure to protect open space through the open space district. So that is why Sonoma County is the way it is today, and why everyone wants to live here, and why the North Bay is wonderful. When you look at the rest of the Bay Area, maybe not so much. So I'm just going to take a second on the maps, because maps are sometimes a little hard to, you really have to think about it. But the green areas on the maps, the one on my left is the original ones dating back to 1998. And then in 2016, you can see that we expanded them. All the wetlands down there in South County are now protected. And we've got some up in Cloverdale that we didn't have before. So we tripled the acreage in 2016. And I can get more into that later, but the downside to all that is they're only good for 20 years and they have to be renewed every 20 years. Same with the UGB. So they're not permanent. So I probably don't need to tell this group why we need green belts, but there are many reasons why green belts contribute to a healthy climate. It protects natural and farmlands, which provide us clean air and water, security, habitat, recreation, health, biodiversity. Having these protections prevents sprawl, which is polluting and expensive. It reduces climate changing emissions by focusing on city-centered growth. And in the past few years, we've also realized that greenbelts help reduce wildfire risk, and that infill development and green buffers are very important to wildfire safety for our community. And they also provide equitable access to open space and locally grown food. Because when you think about it, if you have to drive, all the way to Yosemite to open space, that's very, very difficult. So we're lucky that we have these lands close by. Not all of them are parks. So what about the South County? So according to folks that I've spoken to who have been in the community for a very long time, the South County is a net contributor to protected open space in terms of the open space district, in terms of the sales taxes that are collected, and that I haven't crunched all the numbers, but really the District 2, the South County, really should have more designated open space and more parks than it does now. Now we do, we're not doing bad. In Petaluma, we've got Tole, which was recently opened. I've got a list here, just a second, let me get over here. We have, of course, Helen Putnam, Tole, Schomburger Park, the Paula Lane Preserve, Lucchese Fields, there's multiple city parks. So it's not like the South County is devoid of open space, but compared to some of the other districts, Blake, we need you to fight for more for the South County. Oh, of course, there's always Lafferty. That's another story. Can't get into Lafferty right at this moment. We can do better. So when it comes to moving forward with the county on green space and open space. So the number one thing they can do, Blake, is uphold and renew the existing policies. So unfortunately, we've had to spend a fair amount of time, we, the environmental community, to stop bad projects that have been proposed in community separators and in and around greenbelts. The county should say no, follow the policies, ain't gonna happen. So let's just, number one, uphold what we've got right now and renew the community separators at the county level. That, it seems like a long way off at 2036, not that far away. We need to start thinking about that and also making them permanent so we don't have to go through this whole process. You mentioned updating the general plan, and I was at that meeting, and I would have to say that the county needs to prioritize the general plan update, carry it to provide input to the county. And of course, we've had wildfires, we've had the pandemic, but our general plan has kind of been put on the back burner. And when they discussed it the other day, and maybe I'm going too long, but how do I phrase this? They're proposing 6 years and like $5.8 million to do the general plan. And it hasn't been budgeted. So we need to get the county to prioritize the general plan, to shorten the timeline and the cost. I mean, there are lots of counties and cities who are doing that right now. And okay, it looks like I'm gonna get cut off. So we need to strengthen it. We need to do it now. And the last thing that I think would really make a difference as number one is to put mini UGBs around those unincorporated areas that you were talking about. Because right now, the urban service areas in the unincorporated communities are more or less protected. But if we had a policy and voter-backed policies to prevent them from sprawling out, especially with all the pressure from RENA and the housing, to make sure that it is infill. So that's what we would love you to do, Blake.
Thank you very much, Teri, sorry. That was such in-depth and beautiful presentation, and Blake, candidate Hooper, will hand it over to you to respond.
Well, first of all, thank you for your comments about the kind of kickoff they've had for the general plan process. We have cities going through this process as we speak. There's no excuse for the limited attention that they've given it. And just to speak briefly about why this is important, this is our zoning map, zoning code. This is our implementing ordinances. This is how our planning and permitting department works. This is every fight that you've seen at the county. In many ways is because we have been working off a 36-year-old document that keeps having to be updated for every little thing. So that is why this is so critical and why it's going to be so critical for any of our climate policies going forward. On our green belts, I just want to say absolutely. I want us to get to a point where, one, the passing it again is not something we have to worry about, but two, something that we don't have to constantly bring up every so many years. This is what has helped define Sonoma County. It's what's helped prevent us from going into sprawl. Part of why our cities can be such an engine for transit-oriented development is because they've been put in a position to be contained, and we don't want to move away from that. The other element of this, our board over the last decade constantly tries to find projects that they can put in these boundaries where they're not supposed to have development, and they'll find any little excuse to do it. As a supervisor, I would not find that to be acceptable in the slightest. I mean, unless you're trying to make a mitigation for some structural issue that's already out there, there's very little exception. And even then it's got to be because there's going to be an even greater climate risk. These areas are supposed to be protected for a reason. It's also why so many of them have stayed agricultural. And this is really critical for us because it's a big chunk of our economy too, but it's also important for how we keep these lands from turning into sprawl and, essentially McMansions for people who move out here. The other element you brought up, these mini UGBs for some of our rural communities that aren't defined as a city, I think that's a wonderful idea. I know communities like Pengrove have very much wanted something like that in place already, in part because they also want to protect encroachment on their own surroundings and they don't really have a defined area. I think that's a perfectly reasonable policy approach. And then just speaking to the overall necessity of the green belts for our community, I believe historically, we're some of the first to do this. I know like Marin County loves that they have their separators, but I think we got there first. And it has helped define what Sonoma County is. I think we have too much water use right now. I think we have to have a serious discussion about the number of wineries we have, a serious discussion about the practices they employ, a serious discussion about event centers, and similar discussions with our dairy communities, with our standard farming communities, cannabis as it starts to rise up as well. These are all discussions we need to have, but underlying all of them is a need to make sure that our cities don't sprawl out, but continue to grow up. And as far as moving just past the climate issue, there's also a wildfire issue. I was just fielding questions to this earlier today. We have wild urban interface. We have it in Petaluma. We have it in Santa Rosa. CAL FIRE is about to reclassify a whole chunk of this county as being high risk. The best way to deal with that is not to build out in it where you're going to have more risk of any number of things happening. The best way to deal with that is to make sure it's being well managed and you have good vegetation management. But we're not going to be able to guarantee that if we start to encroach beyond our borders that way. And that's also why I know this came up, Teri, and part of the conversation that you had, which is just the projects that get approved and the need for more parks in the 2nd district, need for more open space. When those RENA numbers came through, and for anybody who doesn't know what RENA numbers are, just to shorthand really quick, it's essentially the unit development numbers that the ABAG, or the Association of Area Governments, which is now part of MTC, which is effectively the state at this point, numbers that are given out that every community is supposed to match in terms of development. When the county got their numbers, they started looking at a sporadic development pattern as if they didn't know what to do or what to expect. And they were talking about putting a good 3,000 homes right next to Petaluma's wild urban interface. And just to give you an idea, wild urban interface is effectively the area that burns down the fastest and causes the most devastating fires for our community. I know we haven't had a big fire in the 2nd District. It doesn't mean we won't, and it doesn't mean we can't. That's why it's important that we expand our protected public spaces, especially out in these areas. And it's why it'll be a critical priority for me. And with that, I think I've responded thoroughly. Thank you so much, Teri, for bringing this forward, because it's a thing we don't think about often, but it's so critical for making the rest of this work.
Well, I didn't think it was possible, but Blake, you can do anything you set your mind to. Thank you so much for our 3 incredible speakers covering a huge range of topics in a little bit of time. And Blake, for speaking to each topic from individual from the audience. How do we get fare-free buses in Sonoma County?
Oh, Zoom cut out for a little bit there, but if you're asking how we get fare-free buses for countywide, that is a great question. So another big aspect of public transportation is getting people to find it to be convenient and something that they can trust as routine. Between seniors, students, and just folks who are trying to make use of transit to get around, fare-free buses is a really great way to build up interest, get people to take the bus more regularly, get people to use public transit without even thinking about it. You hop on a bus and you jump off. It's also great for efficiency because a good chunk of why buses, where they get backed up, is in trying to take fares. There are certainly ways we can fund this at the county level. There is one idea I've had, and it's going to look like I'm copying from the chat because I know somebody brought this up too, but we're looking at PG&E settlement funds. These are great uses of those funds. And I commend the person who brought that up because it's something we need to talk about more publicly about how we're going to use that at the county level. The other thing is there are a number of federal grants that have come in to try and stimulate increased public transit use. This would be a great way of doing that. It's also a great green, essentially a climate grant at the same time. And then finally, we have vehicle miles traveled standards that are coming into our cities, and the county is looking at maybe adopting some clarity on that, but they're going to have to soon. A great way to look at mitigations, because with everything in development, there's mitigations, is to look at using whatever funds we get from, let's say, a project that's approved that's actually going to be a problem for VMT. And I'll explain that in a minute. A great way to look at how we can start to use those mitigations is to look at having those developments pay into free fares, pay into easy access for our buses, and expanding out our bus network. And just for anybody who doesn't know, vehicle miles traveled is a new standard that came from the state. Essentially, just in a nutshell, and I'm sorry I'm oversimplifying, and I want to especially apologize to Councilmember Fischer, who's actually done a lot of work on this. So, but just to give a brief talking point on it, essentially it is designed to make sure that when we are approving projects, either as a city or a county, we are keeping in mind the number of miles traveled to get to and from that project. So if you're putting housing in the middle of nowhere and the closest grocery store is 20 miles away, obviously that is not a good project in terms of making sure you have more bikeable spaces, more people walking to and fro. So I am grossly oversimplifying, but that's really where the goal is to try and make sure that we're not building projects that are going to make our traffic situation worse and make car use worse. I think mitigations for that are also a great way where we can start to fund fare-free transit. And then the other big thing is just looking at the green energy grants that they have, the transit dollar grants that they have for some of these projects that really start to look for ways to make public transit use expanded. And this is another place where we can start to see dollars travel to that fund to make sure we have fare-free use of our buses, because it's actually not that expensive when you consider where a lot of the operational costs actually come from. And I will end it there.
Thank you so much, Blake. And I think you have a room full of supporters and ideas coming in the chat, and would love to close with how can people support you and your campaign to have these visions and solutions become a reality?
Thank you very much. So we have been going since August, and we've only been building steam since then, and we're at a critical point. A lot of people didn't think we would get this far, but now we're at a point where we honestly could very well win this in June. We have built up the walking, the momentum, the endorsements, the support, but now we're at that critical point where we're going to need that much more help to get there. that is why if you want to help our campaign, help us really focus on what the next 10 years for Sonoma County can look like, especially South County. We are looking for volunteers for phone banking, text banking, for canvassing. We're having one of our largest canvas mobilizations is coming up on the 24th. There's going to be large turnout. We're going to have plenty of materials and flyers for people to come. So please don't feel shy. Even if you don't RSVP, we'll be ready for you. We're also looking for folks who are willing to help do postcarding. We're doing that right now in mass, really trying to reach out to folks who have a hard time getting out themselves, let alone receiving materials from other people. And we're also looking for folks who want to host house parties, send letters to the editor. Is a great way to show support in a very simple way is to write a letter talking about why you support the campaign, why you want to see change. None of this has to be negative. We've really focused on being a positive campaign, in part because it's not about who the current supervisor is, it's about what we need going forward. And so you don't have to worry about ever going in that direction. You just talk about why you want change in the 2nd district. And then outside of that, we also accept donations online, and we also accept them by mail. And you can find most of that information at blakehooper.com. And I'm only going to bring up this last point because I know there's 2 people on my team who would be frustrated with me if I didn't. We are coming up against another fundraising deadline on the 23rd. We're well on our way, but we really want to make sure we hit certain numbers. It's going to help us fund mailers and do a lot of other things. So if you have the extra financial ability to donate anything, we would greatly appreciate it. We focus very much on making this a small dollar campaign. So please do not think that you have to donate a certain amount. If you can only give $1 is great. Honestly, we have received so much help that way, and it's working, and we appreciate it. So thank you everybody for being here today. And I hope you got as much out of this as it felt to be able to talk with the community about what we can do going forward.
And one last question for you, Candidate Hooper. This election you're speaking about, when is it?
Oh yeah, you would think I would start there. The primary is on June 7th. So we are coming up to it. May is going to be when people really start to pay attention. So please do not feel like you are late. This is the time for volunteers and support. This is ideally the time. And yeah, it will be a primary election. We can win outright if someone gets 50% of the vote plus 1 vote. And it's a kind of a low turnout election, so every single vote will actually help a great deal.
Thank you so much. There are so many opportunities to plug in, and we also want to invite you to invite a few friends. Word of mouth goes a long way to any of these volunteer opportunities, to donate, or any of our upcoming town halls or coffee conversations. If you have someone who is interested and wants to learn more, definitely be joining the mailing list. So you stay tuned about those. We'll be covering topics like disaster response, law enforcement and mutual accountability, service delivery, and homelessness. And if you just want to have a conversation with Blake, we've got 2 more coffee conversations on Cinco de Mayo and June 2nd, where you can come and just have a conversation, ask your questions, have a dialogue, and get to know Blake even more. So we really hope that you'll engage, that you'll donate, that you'll volunteer, and you'll bring some more friends, and we'll be all cheering forward for the June 7th election. So any final words you want to close our evening off with?
Just to say that we have all been through a lot in the last, I want to say 2 years, but probably a lot longer than that. And I know it can feel overwhelming looking at what's going on nationally and thinking that we've been through a lot and we're still dealing with some of the same problems we've had for the last, well, really, if we're being honest, 20 to 30 years. Local elections, local office, so much of what impacts your community happens at the city or county level. Your support and your help can actually make a huge difference in what we do and what our community looks like going forward, because right now we're kind of on a little bit of a bordering line. A lot of people can't afford to grow up here anymore. They can't afford to stay here. And a lot of the people who are coming can't afford to stay here for a long time either. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to see Sonoma County become this place where you live here for a time and then you can't afford it and you move away. And you've got people who buy their second homes and maybe some retirement folks if they can afford it. We don't have to end up that way. And there's a lot we can do now to change course, but it's going to take the change in leadership. And any of your support would be greatly appreciated because we're very close and we can do a lot of this work together. So thank you again for coming tonight.
Thank you so much, Blake. Thank you to our speakers and our amazing translator, Javier, as well, who has been making this all accessible in Spanish. We hope everybody has a lovely evening, and we look forward to seeing you out on the streets, knocking on doors, or at our next event soon. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.